If you're looking for more content like this, check out mwpnews.com or bewareofspoilers.com. Good evening, and welcome to Beware of Spoilers. I am Adam with a slight sore throat, and you might get a little something, from my voice being a little nasally, but, it is what it is. We'll try our best to move beyond this. So, if you listened to my review of the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes last week, well, let's rephrase that. The review was when the book came out, so this would have been 2020, very early, or mid-2020, was when this book came out. And I sat down and I read the whole thing in one sitting. I was none too pleased with the book. I wasn't particularly pleased with it. Then I listened to it again recently because Josie and I were going to do a big Hunger Games ranking, and we get to the book, and I very briefly addressed it last week in the episode where we ranked the Hunger Games, where I'm like, look, I'm not super gung-ho on this book. I think this book has a lot of weird things that happen in it. Like, I wasn't particularly keen on the relationship between Lucy Gray and Snow, and I wasn't particularly keen on how they characterize Lucy Gray in the book, and I think that, that kind of had me going into this going, I don't know, how much can you improve on this? Because, by and large, you're going to take mostly the same issue. I think, too, it's my other issue was, when you see this, when you read the book, it's kind of like Snow is meant to be a kind of good person, and, this, that, the other. I'm not going to talk about all that. I think that the movie is leagues better than the book. This, I would say, you could make the case is my favorite Hunger Games movie. And this isn't recency bias where I'm forgetting the past movies. I've watched all the movies within the past month or so. Because we did that episode, I wanted to rewatch. So I reread all the books, re-listened to all the books, rewatched all the movies, and then here we are. And I don't think it's recency bias to say this is my favorite of them, because I think it takes when you adapt a book to a movie, it's about what is the core message of the source, and how do we get that to ring true in the movie? How do we keep the core messaging intact? And I think the book gets lost in what it's trying to say. And to an extent, that's a common issue with the Hunger Games as a series. Because, even when you get to, Mockingjay, by the time you get to the end and you're well, now we're going to hold another game, it's this is a weird thing. And then for Katniss to be on board with it, it's yeah, it's kind of a weird thing to happen by the time you get to the end. Fast forward to here, where we are now, with this. I think that, the messaging of this is about how Snow turns evil. And by the time it happens in the book, it doesn't feel as earned as it does here. What he goes through doesn't line up with where he ends up as well in the book as it does here. And maybe it is the difference between visual and reading it. Maybe it is just the fact that when you live in that, and the movie does a great job of just living in moments. I think that's one of the things this does really well, and not glorifying the action. To an extent, I think that this movie is I feel like I'm just kind of talking in circles here. Let's just get down to it. The movie's great. Again, Snow earns his turn. I think that, and I think, too, it's part of it is, I think that there is an issue with the way that Suzanne Collins kind of handles moments in her books. Because I remember even reading Mockingjay, you have to go back a few times. And I was wait, Rue died? Not Rue, Prim died, let me go back to that. I think the movie does a great job of kind of letting us get to know Snow as a person and seeing how driven he is to kind of move along. Because the book is so overlong and because there's so much of his inner monologue going with it, because again, like the Hunger Games, the original trilogy, it is written from the perspective, in the first person perspective. Because the book has so much of that, it makes Snow come off kind of wishy-washy. When you strip all that away, he feels a lot more assertive, he feels a lot more active in his own movie, and he feels like he is making decisions that are impacting the plot without endlessly complaining, and he feels more on top. Because of how condensed down the timeline is, it feels like he's going through a lot more in a much shorter period, which also helps to generate more. I see why he's radicalizing. It is there was that episode of Supergirl that I talk about where they do the backstory of Agent Liberty. That's kind of what this movie is, and it handles it a lot better than the book did. Tom Blyth, I think his name is, who plays Snow, is great in this. Rachel Zegler, we talked about it before with, with Shazam! Fury of the Gods, and we talked about her with, West Side Story, her big debut. Also fantastic in this, and I think that, she plays the character perfectly without feeling too manic pixie dream girl-ish, which is kind of my issue with Lucy in the book, where it's like she feels too flighty. She feels like she has a point and a drive that's not just, this is the object of Snow's affection. And it creates a character who feels more autonomous. And then when she gets to the end and she does do the quote-unquote betrayal, which we don't know how much of that is actually Snow, or is real, or Snow's paranoia. That is so well done. And when that happens, because this character has been given more agency and has been given more of a active role in her own survival in this, and it's not so much being given more of an active role, it's that because it's not as stretched out, it feels more like she's trying to do it, keyed in. And it feels more earned, for lack of a better word. You don't really need to earn the right to your own survival. Who was the other two that I really like? I loved the way they adapted Casca, especially. Because I think that, Viola Davis is just doing a fantastic job as Gaul. She's just, chewing the scenery, loving every second of being on screen. She's being given the ability to play a character who's just batshit insane, and just, I'm going to take this opportunity and just cling to it with both hands. It's like she knew exactly what she was given the opportunity to do, and she ran with that. So bravo. But that's kind of what the character was there. Casca in the book, until we get to the reveal at the end of who he is and what his role is in the Hunger Games as a whole, isn't well portrayed. Here, we get the hint of who he is the entire way through, and we do get I'm not going that way. We do get the sense that he is, that he is this person who's burdened with something the entire way through. He's not just a drunk for the sake of being a drunk. And again, that comes from the fact that we're watching a movie that is not in first person, because we do have Snow on screen. While it is mostly we don't really see anything that doesn't happen to Snow, we're not getting Snow's tinge and Snow's bias towards things. So for him to get this thing where it's we get to see him through a more objective lens, where he is the Oppenheimer who created the Hunger Games and is looking in horror at his drunken creation that was done half as a joke and the other half as a school assignment. And it's just one of those things that's holy shit, that is dark. That's not to say there aren't problems. I think that, and again, it does come with the fact that this is an adaptation. I think fundamentally the more interesting parts of this story come after and before it. I want to know more about what happened with the Dark Days. We get a little taste of it in the very beginning with the flashback to Tigris and Coriolanus in the capital during the war. We get a little taste, but I don't think that's really enough. I want to what led up to this war? Like, what happened in this world that led to this point? And I want to see that a little bit more. And the same goes for, like, we're told the Snow family is this powerful family that's fallen on hard times, which kind of gives us a weird, kind of similar thing where, like, the entire time I'm watching this, I'm like, this reminds me a lot of how you would do an adaptation of Thrawn Ascendancy, because it's kind of the same thing. But at the same time, when you're sitting there, you're trying to figure out where, what was the Snow family big for? What was the structure in which the Snow family was this esteemed ruling house prior to the Dark Days? And then how does that figure into why are they now dying? Why is this family now on its last leg where Snow is its last hope? And then the question also becomes, not just that, but also, why is there a Christmas tree already lit on government property in mid-November? That's not the question that I was asking, that's just me driving and noticing that. The question that I have is, what happens down the line? I want to see more of Snow's rise to power. Now that we have him as a character who we can love to hate, I want to see him come into his own. I want to see him become the man that is Donald Sutherland. And there are so many little moments in this movie that I just love, and how they dovetail back into the original. And before we get to that, though, I also want to see the falling out between him and Tigress. Because that's the other thing, is that, I don't know if anyone else remembers this, but there's that furry that appears in Mockingjay Part 2, where it's like, oh, this is a little weird. That's the same character as Hunter Schafer's character here. And she's also great in this movie. I really enjoyed her performance. And I want to see what causes her to join in, because the way she's characterized here is kind of interesting, where she's looking at the horror of the Hunger Games and kind of like, this is horrible. Like, she is one of those people that's like sympathetic to the tributes. What happens where she decides to become a stylist for the Hunger Games? And then what leads to her falling out with Snow to the point where she's helping Katniss bring him down. Her cousin, who is kind of a brother to her. I want to see that story. And I think that that's kind of the ultimate thing with this and why this worked so well. If you go and watch the first Hunger Games movie, you don't have an immediate what happens next. That story is ended. This one, I left and I'm like, I want more. If they announced tomorrow they're doing a show on Starz, because it's Lionsgate and Lionsgate on Starz, if they announced tomorrow they're doing a Hunger Games continuing series about Snow's years aging, I would be like, number one, how do I get into that writer's room? And number two, can we have that next week? Like, that is how well this movie is executed. And I think, too, it's like when you watch this, kind of where we are with this is there are so many little things that dovetail back to what leads to his fall. And the one thing I'm not really particularly keen on is the use of the quote at the very end. It's the things we love most that destroy us. I love that quote from Mockingjay Part 1, with Donald Sutherland delivering that as he's talking to Katniss. But in this case, Lucy Gray doesn't really tie into his fall in any meaningful way. That's kind of the issue that I have with this. It's like Lucy Gray disappears, and then by the time the Hunger Games happen, it's just no one talks about the female victor from District 12. Like, even Katniss, like, when they talk about it in the book, it's like Katniss is kind of like, well, we did have one female victor years ago, but that's the entirety of what they talk about. That's the beginning and end of Lucy Gray's acknowledgement in the original book, because she ran off, and it's because the Capitol wouldn't want to talk about that. So obviously they wouldn't bring her up again. And I think it would be like a sequel to this would be so interesting. I would be so on board with that. Yeah, and there's so many little things like him being tormented at the very end of his time with Lucy, where him being tormented by the the Mockingjays singing the Hanging Tree, which is a song that was written. I mean, unless that's the only thing they mean is that it's like, oh, that song that became the battle cry was written by Lucy Gray, but I don't think that's particular. That's a stretch, I think. And at the end of the day, it's like that whole sequence is just so great. The Mockingjays all whistling the tune of it to torment him as Lucy escapes. Like it's one of those things where it's like when we talk about the prequels in Star Wars, they add some context, but there are things where it's like you would think that would have been kind of referenced at some point in this, like where it's like it's kind of weird that no one talks about this, and to an extent that's the kind of the problem you have with prequels. To an extent, you'd think you would have some kind of emotional response in Mockingjay when the song that is the salvation, the propo that is the salvation for District 13 is scored to the song that comes back to all this, that was written by this woman that he was in love with, and even that love story is handled so much better here. Like, when you like, because we don't have to live with Snow's constant inner thoughts of, I'm in love with this girl, I'm in love with Lucy Gray, it doesn't come off as he's in love with her. And then by contrast, when it comes time for him to have his fall, it's like, oh, I can buy that he only developed romantic feelings for her in his time in 12. So his willingness to ditch that to get his family back and to get his life back, I can buy that for who this character is. In the book, he's too deeply into that, which is a problem. I think it's very well handled here. What else have I got? I think that's really it. I'm very, very, this month so far has been two major surprises for me. Because it's not that I went into the Marvels thinking I wasn't going to like it. I went into the Marvels thinking it was going to be fun, and I really enjoyed that. This, I went in with no expectations. I went into this movie expecting to, I don't want to say hate it, but I expected to leave the theater and be like, yeah, the movie's competently made, and it is, it's another Hunger Games movie, but my fundamental issues that I have with the narrative are still intact. This movie solved a lot of those problems. And it wasn't until I watched the movie after just listening to the book that I'm like, oh, that's why I had this big of a problem here. It's because it's in first person. But then once you get rid of that, it solves it. So I think that is kind of where I am on this. Check this movie out. Definitely worth checking out. If you've liked the previous, I would say this is the best of the Hunger Games movies. To the point where it's like, even Mockingjay Part 1 and even, Catching Fire, the way those movies end, where it's like they're meant to be like we are going into a sequel. Like, I would say the first Hunger Games movie doesn't really end on a you need to see the next movie. This one is one where I left and I was like, can I get more? When can I get more? And how quickly will I be getting more? Which is good. If we're seeing the death of the superhero movie, let's see more. Let's see the YA and science fiction fantasy adaptation make a resurgence. If we're gonna have something take over the superhero movie in the 2020s, maybe this will be it. We'll go back to this. I mean, it's kind of dominated in the 2000s. But we'll wrap up there for today. Tomorrow we'll be talking about The Holdovers. Tomorrow morning we'll be talking about Invincible episodes 2 and 3. We'll be catching up with that because, wait, what's that? Is that today? I think that is today. We'll definitely do episode 2 tomorrow. I don't know if episode 3 is out. But we'll be doing definitely episode 2 tomorrow, maybe episodes 2 and 3. And we'll be back with, because Loki's done. We'll be back with more as it happens. Until our next episode, have a great rest of your week.